people in this room talk about this a lot, but Tua seems more polarizing and discussed by national pundits than anybody. Was there a time where you were on a treadmill in the last 8 months, happened to have ESPN or Fox on, you see the nonstop debate on Tua? What do you make of that? Do you think it's unfair scrutiny? Does it come with the territory?
I imagine it just comes with the territory. Just you play quarterback in the National Football League. You know, the performance is always going to be the most scrutinized position. Over, under, too much credit, all the blame. So I think he handles it extremely well, especially being around, many different quarterbacks, from Drew Brees to last year, Justin, Derek Carr, Jay Cutler. I mean, I've been fortunate to see the gauntlet myself and, with Mike with his experience, or really our whole staff. I think overall it's just the hardest thing, I think, is just it's take it as a compliment. They're talking about you because the minute they don't talk about you, it's probably because you're not playing.
Uncertainty this week on the line with Austin kind of dealing with some things, Teron. How does that change you guys' game prep? Possibility of not having one or both of those guys out there?
That's a good question because, I think it ties into last week when we were talking about how do we plan for contingencies on the line and how do you build continuity. So I think that reality, you saw this last game, an execution of Matt Applebaum working those contingencies that we had talked about that maybe you guys didn't see in practice, but we had worked in walkthroughs in our individual. So ultimately, you always want to create consistency up front through guys playing the position, communicating with each other. And then when injuries occur, you just basically are moving through plan A, B, C, D, all the way up until, okay, we don't have anyone left at the position. So I think this week, we're operating under one context with the thought that the next couple contingencies are things we have talked about, we do have flexibility with, but ultimately everything's a day-by-day situation just because, the way these guys recover, how quickly, how much pride they put into their performance and to the recovery. We'll basically just make sure that each day we're up to date with our training staff, with Mike, Chris, that we understand who will be available, what is our plan from it, and we adjust like we did. And as a credit to Matt and Mike and Lem for working the drill as they did all throughout training camp.
You mentioned contingencies. Sorry, David. You mentioned contingencies. One of them was moving Rob outside during the game last week. I'm curious your thought process of moving a guy in position versus bringing a guy off the bench. I know you talk about continuity, but how do you balance that element of it, moving a guy outside versus just bringing a guy in to replace another guy?
Sure. I think when it comes to linemen, I think it really goes down to what stance you're playing in. Sometimes it's easier to stay on your side than it's supposed to switch across the ball. Like last year in LA, our contingency plan was Matt Filer was our emergency right tackle if we would have had one or two injuries. So he would have been our left guard to right tackle. We practiced it. We did it more in individual. Like you hit it on late in the week just because it's opposite stance. I don't think it's necessarily as a guy in the game as opposed to a guy out of the game. It's more of you're always evaluating what's your best group, your best combination, your best, who's communicating what, who's doing what. I think you're always working multiple variables, and it's a credit to. And I learned that lesson from my second week in the NFL. I think second month. I can't remember. It was a long time ago, but I was fortunate enough. I drove around. Howard Mudd was consulting with us at the Saints, and I had to pick him up from the airport and drive him around. And he was very blunt and direct. My memories of him, and he used to always say, every day, when you're a coach someday, every day you're responsible for your group, and knowing that if that guy goes down, what's your next plan? What are your best five? And also at the same time, when you're making cuts in training camp, who are the guys? So you're always evaluating your group and knowing them. And that's a lesson I learned and always stuck with me because Aaron Cromer kind of put it into my head too. So in turn, now you make your progression. You go to talking with Matt. We discussed that, and he's really embraced that, and he's always constantly on it. So I just think ultimately, like to answer your question, it's basically we're always evaluating what's the variable going on, all right, and who do we believe are the guys, and sometimes it might not be the combination that would be the most obvious, but to us it's already been drilled and practiced.
Mike or Daniel said, the game plan going in against the league was to get McKissick more involved than he was. Will there be a greater focus in getting more targets?
Well, I think some of the touches we were trying to incorporating him on, the game football played the way out it did. So the opportunity that we're trying to give him the ball, something didn't go the way it allowed us to operate with getting him the ball on time and the timing of the play. I think always we're trying to make sure that we get our guys the matchups and the opportunities that we want in the course of a game. Always the hardest thing is just what's going to happen on that play, So I think it takes all 11 to make sure that, Tua can get the ball out on time, get it to Mike, get it to Jalen, get it to Tyreek, whoever it is. But ultimately, we want to get him involved, and obviously that was a goal of ours in the game. It just didn't work out that way.
And where is your level of confidence in him at this point as a blocker?
Yeah, I think he's been improving since the day he got here, and I think the greatest challenge is just getting those ops in a game. So it's trying to always constantly put your guys in the best position to maximize their skill set. So I think that we've been pleased with what he's been doing so far, and we'll continue trying to get him opportunities at the ball in the game.
Frank, you've been around Ingold obviously a couple of years with the Raiders. Not every fullback can go out on a 3rd and 1 for downfield passing play like he can. Is there any unique skill that he has different from the stereotypical fullback? What's appealing about him that makes him an asset?
Sure. I was fortunate to be there when we drafted Alec in Oakland this year before Vegas, and we had him at the Senior Bowl. And getting to know him, you just understand him as a person. His high school coach was my high school coach, so I'm from Wisconsin. So the exposure to who he is as a person kind of shows you who he is as a player. So obviously being new into the system, coming off his injury, he's done a fantastic job. He was a high school quarterback, so guys who are high school quarterbacks have normally a great understanding of the game, and they understand more than just their position. So as he's been now assimilated to the offense, I know Mike and Eric too both feel we're just scratching the surface on what we like to do with him this year. And you saw it at the end of his time in Vegas with what they're asking him to do. You can see him playing all over the field.
Frank, I noticed this past game, Tyreek in particular was used in motion a lot to get him on the move. I'm curious, just from a broad picture schematic standpoint, what the advantage is for him in particular, getting him on the move when you're running some of these plays?
Good question. I think as far as the advantage, it also is more of what does that movement do to the defense, and then what is their adjustment. I think you deliberately have to do. You just don't. Some people might just do things to do things. We look at when we do something. What reaction are we trying to get? Like, what do they do? So whenever we try and do things, we're trying to attack a component of the defense, and we're using our skill in a way to use their reaction to our advantage. So I think always you're seeing and studying, and you're realizing, okay, if we do this, here's the reaction we anticipate. If we don't get that, then it's probably this. So now quarterback, you're thinking, here's your progression. You can see now how you teach a passing concept. So we try and use everything strategically when we're moving people. That's why we move people so often. So I don't think it's too just relegated to this offense. I think that that's the history between Mike and his time with Kyle and their time in San Francisco and wherever they've been, is that understanding how motion creates challenges to the defense and then using it to our advantage. That's really what we try and do, not necessarily like if we did this with him, it's like if we use him in this capacity, what reaction are we going to get? How can we use that in our attack to build strain on them? I think that's the overall when we try and do stuff.
You mentioned yesterday his timing was off on a couple of plays. Do you think the lack of continuity maybe in the offensive line in game one had something to do with that, or is it just maybe just not seeing the receiver in time?
Well, yeah, there is. The answer to your question is always, it's never just as black and white as one thing. That a couple times that did play into it. Other times we got a reaction from the defense that we didn't anticipate. I think you look at a couple plays in the game and you realize that you can practice things all weeks, or even like you play an opponent in the opener, you can sometimes over prepare for certain things, and then you run that play more times than you would naturally in a normal course of a week. So you're getting used to, and then all of a sudden when the variable hits you, you're like, oh. And so I think some of that comes into, it's game one for us, coming together as an offense. We're learning from it. We're learning from the reactions. I think sometimes when you're an outcome-based organization, you just, hey, you should have done this, as opposed to, okay, what happened at that moment? What were you thinking? Why did you do what you did? And then you start teaching them their reactions. And then I think as a player, you're ultimately trying to realize, was my action correct, or was my reaction maybe needed tweak or improvement? I think it takes all 11 on offense to be working together, and that's our goal through the course of the season. This should be, like, I know Mike hit it, and it's just constantly, I think, a great message overall for us as coaches, fans. Like, that game should be our worst game, because as we work to grow, it's a race to improve. I mean, constantly. Your worst football, you hope, is in September, and your best ball is coming in December as you're making your push for January. So I think overall some timing things would come down to reactions of the defense, maybe who was in there, understanding what we're trying to do. And I think that's all going to improve as we get more experience together. And then you can understand the reaction he's going to have when the defense does this, or when Tua is given a reaction, all right, off of what he's seeing, you can anticipate this. I think all that growth is going to come, as Mike said, the more we play together as the months go by in the season.
Ravens were in dime personnel almost half the time in the game on Sunday. I was curious, how challenging is it to attack a defense that can stay in that sub package for almost half the game?
I think that you just, like, every defensive personnel group has complexity to it. You're just trying to see what is their goal inside of that package. So what are they trying to do, and what are they trying to do, and how do we attack it? So I think that the big thing was, like, this last game with New England, around the second half, we kind of were able to see what their plan of attack was communicated. Communication improved in the second half. After halftime, we painted a better picture. So I think ultimately when you're getting whatever personnel grouping, whether it's dime, their base, nickel, whatever the defense is, I think that if we have an understanding of what that means and how we're trying to attack it, that helps us as an offense. So I think that overall, we just have to improve in our consistency and communication, and us as coaches delivering the information to help our guys know what they're trying to do.